Greetings, everyone, and welcome to the Pan Future Podcast. I am your host, Sean. Today is Saturday, March 18th, 2017. This week, I have an interview I recorded about a week ago with my friend Jamey Racer. He is a radiologist and teacher of radiological things. And we met at, there's several local science-y groups that we go to, and we just got to talking, and he was willing to join me in my studio for a podcast on radiology and the ways that technology has changed his practice, including the software and the hardware and the artificial intelligence that is being incorporated into the practice of radiology and all those things. And also the dog that lives in my house makes a brief appearance, although I doubt that she actually learned anything from this discussion. I hope you learned something as I did. So as my interviews often do, we just kind of rambled on until we felt like we were done. So it's a long show today, and I'm just going to go ahead and skip the news and get right to the interview. All right, so welcome to the show. I have here with me today Jamey Racer. And Jamey, why don't you tell me a little bit about your job and the things that you do and why I'm having you on the show?
So I've been a radiologic technologist for over 15 years now, and I'm teaching it now at a small college nearby, but I've been involved in medical imaging pretty much my whole life. I grew up with a health condition and was under all these like wacky machines as a kid, and grew up thinking, hey, that's something I think I could do as a job. And when I got into it, I was just in love with the physics. I thought it's finally somebody explains the universe to me, and it makes sense, and at the same time it's so overwhelming I don't want to know all of it now. But and it also gave me a chance to there's some contribution to society, to be helpful, and I like making things better as opposed to creating chaos. So I've worked at, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, where do you teach?
Pioneer Pacific College is a vocational school just down the road. I've done a lot of different healthcare technology work. I've done support for electronic medical record systems, and I've traveled around quite a bit as a technologist. I started my career as a temp traveler technologist, and so I've worked at Boston Medical Center and Seattle Medical Center and Seattle Harborview Hospital, actually. And lots of little, like a lakeside outpatient clinic that, I might take 2 or 3 x-rays a day. So I've seen this wide range of healthcare over my lifetime. And it's been interesting to see it change. I started out when it was film and a processor in a dark room, and now we have these wireless digital cassettes that send, your chest x-ray over Wi-Fi to the radiologist. It's been amazing.
That's funny that your job and my job both used to use film and are now digital. It's funny, even though they're different. The publishing, large format publishing, printing, used to be done by sticking pages to a board and then taking a picture of the board to use in the printing press machines that they run things on.
Yeah.
Films, and there used to be stacks and stacks of films.
Yeah, we I still teach my students we have a film processing lab at the school, and we have to learn what the silver, halide crystals are in the film emulsion, and we we have to learn all the old ways. It's actually gotten to be where Medicaid has said, if you're not switching your imaging technology to digital technology, we're going to pay you less for the exams. And so it's been an incentive for hospitals to up their technology. And they're kind of in phase 2 of digital x-ray. They went from an imaging system where you would put an image plate behind somebody, take your x-ray, and then take the digital image plate to a digital image processor. And so there was no film or processing fluid anymore, but it was still a reusable device. And now we've got this Wi-Fi thing where there's no machine in between the display of the image and the image you're just taking. It's improving our efficiency, and it's also it's making imaging available to a lot of people that didn't, that would have been on a waiting list to get an X-ray, or a doctor would have said, those cost a lot and take a long time. Let's wait before we do that exam. Now it's a lot easier.
There's just a lot less machinery, equipment and stuff.
A lot fewer things for a person to move around.
Yeah.
We didn't get into it, and we probably should. The talk about robotics, how robotics has some potential in medical imaging to significantly impact healthcare. So we position patients to get the best view of, say, your knee. If you're having knee pain, we take a knee x-ray, and there are certain positions that we get every angle of your anatomy because we're taking two-dimensional pictures with an x-ray. There are more machines that can do the positioning for you now to some extent, where you just hold your knee still and the camera moves and takes the x-ray without the patient moving. The CT scan has some potential to replace a few, what we call plain film or static x-rays. And just there's a huge potential for some automation to happen in just all of this, aiming the tube at the person and getting the perfect view of the anatomy. This is what we teach to people, how to do this. And x-ray techs sometimes get disparaged as being button pushers. They just go behind the screen and push the button, and of course, there's always more to the story. There's a lot of anatomy and physiology you have to know, and not to mention all of the electrical regulation of the machine to get the optimal image. But the advent of automation and technology that can do all that for you, we're getting closer to being button pushers, and there's a possibility that there's always a little bit of a push from Medicare to relax the regulations. They want to allow people with less education to take the images or order the images now, which segues into another topic I had intended to get into, is clinical decision support software. Is something called CDSS is what it is. But it's giving doctors it's basically just a computer algorithm that looks at all the data a doctor puts in about a patient and gives the doctor some flags basically about the exam you're ordering doesn't really match up with the thing that you said you're looking for. Are you sure you want to do this? In the past that wouldn't have happened, or it would have been maybe a technologist or somebody else to say, this exam isn't going to show what you're asking for, or there's a low probability we can see what this thing is that you're looking for. And the software is out there now to look at all those health factors like your family risk and your someday, in our science fiction future, we may actually have a genetic, code that says your probability of having this disorder is this, and the probability of this exam diagnosing that condition is this. Do you want to roll that dice?
Yeah.
So there's a
So the software it's not making a diagnosis, but
no.
it's telling the doctor, you've ordered these tests or ordered this X-ray. It's unlikely that it's going to help, basically.
That's I mean, that's one, like, I guess, application of it. The other is just saying that, if a doctor gets a lab report back, you draw somebody's blood and they have an elevated liver function or something of that sort, and there's a possibility of some liver inflammation, and it would be useful to see that. You would be able to diagnose hepatitis with a CAT scan. Mm-hmm. The software may suggest, well, here's some exams you could do to rule this out or to, better visualize that. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, it can suggest things too. This, again, is one of those, I don't know how deployed and how quickly it can be done because you're dealing with human lives, and the FDA has to be involved in that decision to make sure we're not making bad recommendations with cool software.
Yeah.
So we frequently want doctors to order less, partially because it's less work for us, but also because it's our training to say, let's be as conservative as possible with radiation. And it feels at times that doctors will see, they've got a hammer, every problem is a nail, So we've got an X-ray, we're going to diagnose everything with an X-ray and a blood draw.
Do you think, you mentioned that there's some push to, as the technology gets better, a push from Medicare or other places to hire less qualified people, basically, because if the day comes when you really are just a button pusher and you don't actually have to know anything, and a person can just go step into the booth and push the button and you're done, do you think there's a danger in having people who don't really know how the stuff works that they're using?
Well, it all depends on how it's rolled out and applied. I mean, there's some validity to saying you don't need an 8-year medical degree to say, have a chest X-ray, this will show us something useful. And there's a big controversy at the moment of the VA wants to relax some regulations on who can order and interpret chest X-rays, and they're suggesting that nurse practitioners can have this I don't know what to call it, a medical privilege or something like that. And so there's lots of pushback by the community, and there are arguments on both sides. Where medicine has become so complicated that everybody is a specialist. And it's getting to the point where, I don't know, we need more professionals to do different things than we used to. And at the same time, we're getting more procedures and tests and things available to us. So we need more people to do those things. And so there's both an expansion and a refinement happening at the same time. There is a risk that as with the technology developing, people could be less necessary. And there's also, possible benefit to people being less necessary. We could do more useful things or lower the cost or barrier for people. So,
I was thinking, is there anything in your area of work that comes to mind that's very AI based or anything like that?
Definitely. I was, looking at some of the stuff that's been published in the last, 6 months to a year about neural networks for radiographic image analysis, looking for like cancers and mammograms and CTs and stuff. We generalize that the human eye can only detect like 16 shades of gray, whereas a computer does not have that limitation. It numerically calculates like the number of electrons that struck a particular detector. And so having a machine do kind of augment the the difference between densities on an image is something that a human can't actually do. You actually need the computer to accentuate those differences for you, and it kind of extends our capabilities. There's a lot of cutting edge is the vogue term for the new science that does not make it out of the lab very quickly.
Yeah.
Radiology's got a unique stance in that we can take data that's already been acquired and run analyses on it that don't, it's not like testing a drug. You have to give it to more people. Once you've got the images have been ordered for something else. The patient already has an issue, and their physician orders this test, and now we've got a big database of all these people that have had this similar exam, and we can, look at them on massive scales that have never been done before. Just 15 years ago, when I first started, radiology was still using film that you took into a dark room and put into a chemical processor, and it ran through a dryer in a minute and a half, and then it's set in a big manila folder in a file room downstairs for 2 to 5 years, depending on how much file room, and then you threw it out. And now it's all compressed pixels on a server somewhere, in cloud storage, and I don't even know what the limitations on storage are anymore. There might be some legal regulation, but storage is getting cheaper and cheaper, so we keep gathering more and more data, and it's just this, a ripe vineyard for new information about human health.
So now a doctor looking at a scan, instead of basing his judgment solely on what the tech might have also seen or his own experience, you can access a database of thousands of previous examples of this thing. Are there computers, are there systems that tell the doctor what it might be, or is it still?
We're getting there in the research. The technology is advancing slowly in that direction, and the other part of the cutting edge is the legislative drag that comes behind all of the advancements. There has to be FDA approval for things, and it takes a long time for human trials to roll out on things. As I was saying, radiology has the advantage of having all this data that came from other incidental exams that we can now, compare and pull things together that we wouldn't have, you wouldn't have even known that these conditions were connected in the past, because, you've got 2 plastic films on 2 separate shelves, and you'd have to hire somebody to go down and pick all the films that have, this pancreatic mass, and let's compare all the images side by side on a big plastic light-up board. Now you can pull them all together, superimpose them, and measure the photon density of each, individual almost cell. We could probably get close to that level if we wanted. It wouldn't be radiology being damaging, ionizing radiation being damaging. We use as little as possible to get the image, so that's kind of overstating the level of detail, but it's possible.
Maybe to backtrack just a little bit, what does radiology include? Most people know about X-rays. Is it any type of scanning that is done? Falls in the category?
It's become the umbrella branch of healthcare that includes almost all medical imaging. Ultrasound uses no ionizing radiation. Ultrasound uses compression sound waves, but it's still part of the radiology department. Magnetic resonance imaging is not per se a form of radiation. We use radio frequency, but it's not X-ray in the the traditional sense of, I don't know, Thomas Edison's fluoroscope and the turn of the century was when this all took off. It was only 1895 when Röntgen is the scientist's name, Conrad Wilhelm Röntgen, discovered that X-rays come out of this particular type of X-ray tube, and he wrote a paper on it. X-rays have been coming out of things for, decades before that while they were playing with these, but Röntgen was the first guy to write it up. And it wasn't long after that they discovered that these have some medical application, and they started doing other things with other types of imaging, and the whole medical imaging as they call it allied health, or it's, an ancillary to the traditional doctoring. They come in and they poke you and listen to you and look at you and feel you, and draw some blood and test it. Around the 1820s, they finally realized now they can look inside you. Mm-hmm. And with the original, X-rays being so popular, every other type of imaging that came along kind of branched out from that. What are other ways we can look in people? Oh, you're fine. Hey, buddy. You want to hear about medical imaging? Is that right up your alley?
The dog has barely enough brain to control her autonomic functions. I don't think any of this is going to stick.
There's an interesting story about X-ray and the brain. So when Röntgen first made his first radiograph, it was of his wife's hand with a ring on it, and it took 20 minutes of her holding still to get this X-ray. And that sounds, horrifically long, like there was some giant radiation exposure, but it's also a much less efficient tube that he was using to create it. But so that they first found out they could take images of bones, and that was great. They could see broken bones, and then it became a quest to let's see if we can see organs and things that aren't bone. And there became a kind of a competition, a race to take the first picture of the human brain. And lots of people tried to make deceptive images, including somebody who took a cat skull, they took a human skull and they filled it with cat intestines that had been filled with mercury, and they took a regular X-ray of it, and it looked like, in a plain film, it looks like you can see all the little noodly parts of the brain, but it was faked. And it wasn't until 1970 that they finally, CT let us look inside and see different densities of brain tissue.
Huh.
Yeah.
That's interesting. How is CT different than X-ray?
So CT uses the same type of radiation. They just apply it differently. You have, everybody knows the big ring or the donut that you go through in a CT or CAT scan. And the CT stands for computed tomography. And tomography is whenever the image source is moving around the thing that it's imaging. And so when you're going through that big ring, there is an X-ray tube shooting X-rays into the center of you along an axis, and it is spinning, in a big spiral. And a lot of people explain it as CT slices you up like a spiral ham. And that's kind of startling for people to hear when they're laying on the table to go into the tube. But it takes sectional slices of you by taking the readings from that spinning X-ray of you and kind of mapping out all the little, it breaks it into cubes, little volumes of density, and you piece those together, and depending on what level of the person you want to look at, you get what looks like a sliced ham of that part of the patient's anatomy. It is literally the exact same type of radiation and X-ray tube and equipment that would take an X-ray of your hand. They've just added all of the spinning mechanism and detectors and computer now. Yeah.
So back to the future a little bit. Is there was 3D imaging technology a part of part of your job now, or do you expect it to be in the future? And
it's been a big part of it for a while now, and mostly because of CT. Those little slices that you stack on top of each other, having the computer means you don't have to. You can rearrange those cubes any way you want, and so rather than having like a flat image, like an X-ray is a one-dimensional image of whatever you're looking at, the CT takes multiple levels that you can compute into like little Lego bricks. And so you have a little cubic model of whatever it is you're taking. And if you just have the computing power to do it, which we've had for decades now, you can make 3D models, moving 3D models of human anatomy. One of my favorites is it's called a 4D heart. And so you have a 3D model of the heart beating, and you can see all the vessels, collapsing and expanding with each heartbeat. It shows you, what looks like a stricture can be expanding and collapsing significantly. And without the 3D component, that's, it's information you would just get a flat picture of a grayish organ. Mm-hmm. So the 3D is huge.
Mm-hmm. I've seen some, I guess it's more speculative technology that they'll be able to bring holographic technology into that as well. I wonder how much it would change medicine if you could sort of stand inside the heart and look at
that,
or VR, maybe even just VR. Put on VR goggles and go.
I'm sure somebody's going to pick that up soon if they haven't already. I have seen recently that there are surgeons that are making 3D printed models of the actual patient's heart that they're going to be operating on. So, somebody has a blocked coronary artery, and the doctor is going to go in and reroute it, or replacing a valve in the heart's another good example. You can take all these pictures and see a 3D model in the computer, but there's something additional. There's some additional information you get by actually holding a little 3D object of the exact size and shape and all the angles that heart has in it. There are some surgeons that one of them made the statement, "I don't think I'll ever do a procedure without a 3D model now." So that was an interesting development. I never thought 3D printing would be a part of imaging, but
cool. I guess a question of resolution of the images, and do the devices? I would think that the devices have mostly exceeded a person's ability to analyze them. Now, if you're using AI and computers to analyze a scan, are they fully up to the level of the measurement instrument? Are the instruments themselves getting better now that the computers are? Not framing the question very well, but
no, I mean, there's an issue in radiology that if you're using ionizing radiation, which CT and X-ray do, and nuclear medicine also, all radiation in the diagnostic imaging wavelength is always somewhat harmful, and so more of it is worse for a patient. So we always try to go as low as possible. Interestingly, I tell my students we're not trying to get the best image possible. We're trying to get the worst image that diagnoses the condition. You try and get the lowest resolution possible. And so, in the scope of physics, a photon is smaller than an electron. And so you could image things down to the atomic scale if you put enough power behind it, but you would be damaging everything that you are imaging. So we're well beyond the capability of making detailed images beyond what we're using now.
So do the computers then allow you to make a better diagnosis with a lower dose of radiation?
Oh yeah, I mean,
rather than upping the radiation to get a better resolution, so the human has a better chance of seeing what's going on.
yeah, they're better at differentiating between the densities that they see. We render everything in black and white, and so there are shades of gray. And I mentioned earlier that we kind of generalize that the human eye sees 16 shades of gray, and a computer has, this infinite range of, it can tell the difference between this group of cells is maybe only 1 or 2% denser than the group next to it. That could be an abnormal cell growth, which could be a tumor or something else. And that's not something a human could detect. They would definitely need the computer to do that. They're not yet at this, this is all stuff that's being tested and refined, and they're kind of comparing like mass detection algorithms and image analysis software to what radiologists do on their own. And it's still in the early stages, and there are so many variables involved in when a doctor looks at an image, knowing something about the patient, knowing something about the tech that took the image, knowing something about, the doctor that ordered it sometimes, gives all this additional information that's really difficult to get into a computer algorithm to detect those things. So I would say they're almost neck and neck. I can tell you some radiologists might be nervous, or wise to be nervous, about the workload being lightened a little bit by some algorithms. So that's on the horizon.
Do you come across, in either in your work or in your teaching, any portable devices and anything that's out there, things that plug into your smartphone, for example?
Yeah. Well, there have been portable X-ray machines for, a long time. It was battery technology, basically, just that made that possible. Smartphones, I haven't seen anything. There seems like this possibility of, you've just got a Wi-Fi display in your hand, and if you have the appropriate probe that, like ultrasound probes, I think would probably be one of the early adopters here, because it's not, the radiation isn't harmful, and you could literally like stick an ultrasound probe on someone's abdomen and look at their fetus with your cell phone. That's totally a possible thing. Some of it, of course, comes down to how economically reasonable is it to make that device in the market that exists, and how much do people want it, and what's its practical application over the machine we've already got. And sometimes there are cool gadgets and toys we could make that we just don't have a financial incentive to do. There's one of the more interesting things that I've run across in the last couple of years is this surprising discovery, surprising to me and most of my students, that peeling sticky tape in a vacuum produces enough X-rays to make an X-ray of, say, your finger. There's a group at, I'm going to say Stanford. It could be USC. I apologize to whoever it is I'm not giving the appropriate credit to, but they took some 3M sticky Scotch tape, off the shelf at a department store, and put it in a little vacuum tube and peel it with an electric motor, and the pulling apart of the plastic and the adhesive creates X-ray wavelength photons, enough so that you can X-ray a body part with it.
I had heard about the X-ray thing, but I did not know it was enough to actually produce an X-ray with. Do they know what the mechanism is that's creating X-rays out of that?
Well, they're studying it, definitely. I don't know what the current understanding of it is, but anytime you're, colliding or separating electron shells, you get some vibration, and that some of that vibration is electromagnetic energy, and some of that is in the wavelength of X-ray, sucking all the. You don't necessarily, you don't get a giant dose of X-ray from the tape dispenser on your desk, because there's oxygen in the atmosphere, and the oxygen absorbs some of the electron collisions that would cause the X-ray, and so. That was kind of a big, don't freak out over your Scotch tape. It's still completely safe, but it's amazing the physics that's out there that we don't even really realize is happening around us. There's a company that's been playing with it to, I don't want to say playing with it, they're actually developing it, but a portable X-ray gun that uses like cartridges of tape. And I looked into it once and recalled that they were trying to develop something to analyze bends of scrap metal, which would require a pretty powerful X-ray source. So I was impressed with the amount of X-ray you can produce out of some sticky tape. Yeah, we're doing it with thousands of volts of AC power, and they're doing it with tape.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Huh. Cool. Speaking of things that people might be afraid of, one of my recurring themes on my show is just educating the general public about what you should and shouldn't be afraid of, and the scale of things. The saying about any chemical is the dose makes the poison.
Oh, yeah.
Obviously, you can die from drinking too much water. So. In terms of getting an X-ray, I forget the number, but maybe if people are concerned about X-rays, how much X-ray do you get exposed to just walking around outside or taking a flight?
Yeah, there's a estimate of radiation exposure that we use, and it's called BERT, B-E-R-T, and it's background radiation exposure. Oh gosh, I should know this because I teach it. BERT is the method I'm going to call it. But what it does is it relates the amount of radiation that you get from normal life to the amount of radiation you're getting from a diagnostic exam. The thing about the BERT exposure explanation is that it kind of points out or describes that radiation's part of normal life. I mean, it comes from the sun, it comes from sticky tape, it comes from welders get X-ray. There's radon gas. You'll get X-ray exposure from being near asphalt on a sunny day. Lots of technologists use the illustration that flying on an airplane from Los Angeles to New York, you get the equivalent X-ray dose of 2 chest X-rays, and this is just from being above the atmosphere.
Yeah,
and nobody has really ever counseled a pregnant woman not to get on an airplane because their radiation exposure. But
there's business travelers who fly almost every day of the week, and they've not seen anything that correlates any higher rate of cancer of any kind to doing that.
There's a level below which we can't calculate how much the radiation causes your cancer and how much cancer is caused by the background radiation in life you experience and just your genetic risk of developing cancer at any given point anyway. And so there's actually some contentious debate that's been going on for a long time about it's something called the hormesis theory that believes that up to a certain threshold, radiation can actually be beneficial, and that some exposure causes like some sort of immune response, like an inoculation that, your cells recognize this type of damage and can deal with it. And above the threshold, it starts becoming a bad thing your body can't deal with. That thesis is practically unprovable because of, all the variables in life people have to deal with. But as a profession, we use the assumption that there's what's called a linear risk, that no amount of radiation is without some risk that's completely safe. Every extra exposure you get adds something to you. But yeah, below a certain point, you should be more worried about the vegetables you don't eat.
Yeah.
Yeah. The XKCD radiation chart is one of my favorite illustrations of radiation risk. And shortly after the Fukushima incident, the artist from XKCD, Randall Munroe, put together a graphic chart of little squares that represent in area the comparison of different doses of radiation, everything from the dose of radiation you will get from eating a banana to the dose of radiation you will get from sleeping next to another human, all the way up to being exposed to a rod from a reactor, and it's all comparable along this giant scale. But it's one of those facts of life that you can't be absolutely accurate about it down to the last detail. There's a lot of estimation and speculation that goes into understanding risk. The doctors that order x-rays are supposed to weigh this concept of risk versus benefit. What's the risk that something bad will happen to you in the future versus the risk of not diagnosing something that could kill you today? Give me cancer in 30 years if I get to live today. That's kind of the trade-off some people are going to make. And there's no guarantee you'll get the cancer in 30 years. It's just you've slightly upped your possibility. So
yeah, and it sounds like the risk is so slight, but like many of the things the public sort of takes out of context or takes to the extreme. A new drug is released and it has potential side effects, and you hear the commercial and it has this arm-long list of side effects. What that really means is like they tested this on 1,000 people and 3 of them had these side effects, but they have to tell you about it. You're upping your risk for cancer possibly by getting an x-ray, but that's because scientifically it would be unscientific to say no, it's impossible, or yes, it's certain. There's just a scale in between.
Mammography is notorious for causing alarm. That people say, "Wait a minute, I'm getting an X-ray of my breast that causes cancer to detect if I have cancer. How is that? Does that make sense?" And it makes sense mathematically, actually, that the chances of you developing a cancer from the dose of radiation you get to your breast is actually statistically lower than your risk of dying because we missed it. And no one knew that you had that lump was cancerous. And there's a whole scale of protective measures that get applied to, we start out with the lowest dose possible. If there's some reason to check further, we'll take another image with slightly more radiation to give us a better detailed image. If there's no reason for concern, you never get that second x-ray. And so there's a lot of screening is what, is what it's called. You do screening mammograms for people that don't have any known issue going on. No masses are detected or lumps or anything. And then if something is unusual, then you call them back and you get a little more detailed, and there's progressive steps from there. But there's a lot of alarmist, rhetoric maybe around radiation being this always harmful thing that you avoid at all cost. And it's cell phone radiation is a big fear factor for some people, and we understand some physics pretty well at this point, and we understand wavelengths and ionization and molecular and DNA damage and those things, and it's just go with the consensus of the experts that say it's better than not doing it.
And that it seems like there's more effort in the medical field to go to refine family history and that sort of thing too, where I don't know if it's out of an abundance of trying to catch everything, but to use the breast cancer example, at one time it was like everybody over a certain age get your mammograms. Then over time, more data can be studied, and you say, well, what's your family history? How likely are you to get it? Okay, you have no family history of breast cancer whatsoever, so you don't really have to start this until a different age or something like that.
Yeah.
I would imagine the database could also play into that too, just having better access to all that information.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And this is what you were, we kind of touched on this earlier, that having a bunch of data points in a computer that you can compare side by side or run algorithms on, is the benefit of that is immeasurable compared to having, clipboards with paper and written values and things on it that may or may not get raise a red flag for a doctor.
I mean, even beyond, let's say you have a database of 10,000 x-rays that the computer can scan, that's one thing. But also, if you have a database of medical histories that you could say, you're a 45-year-old woman who has smoked for 20 years and grew up in Nevada. And within that database, there might be a whole bunch of other people who have that similar experience. Obviously, everybody is a little bit different, but even if you can parse your data sets into people who had similar upbringing, similar backgrounds, you might even have a different way of viewing medical data that way too.
Back to the idea of background radiation being, part of life. Not many people actually think about it, but you mentioned living in a particular area being part of your your health risk. This is also part of your radiation exposure. People who live in Colorado and Denver are a mile higher in the atmosphere and have a mile less radiation shielding over them, so they get a higher dose.
I lived there, and Denver is also a site for one of the places you have to check for radon too.
Yeah,
because of the bedrock. In Wisconsin, where I grew up, that was at some point it became part of the public consciousness to check for radon. It's like when I was very young, nobody thought about it, but then, I don't know, my early teens or something, it started to crop up in the news everywhere that you want to have your radon detector in your house and all that.
Yeah, and actually radon is, the biggest radiation exposure that people experience, more so than medical imaging or radiation, from the sun or cosmic radiation.
Is radon everywhere? Or is it mostly granite bedrock or something?
Yeah, I can't tell you that accurately. I suppose it can exist everywhere. It just depends on, what minerals in the area.
Yeah, I've heard too, and it was true of the when deciding whether to get a mitigation system that sucks the air out from under your basement or not. We actually had to do that in Denver because I forget what the number stands for, but the EPA's recommended number is like under 6 or something, and our house tested at 17.
Oh, yeah.
Because it was wintertime and it had been closed up, nobody was living there. So that's in places where it gets cold and you have your house closed up all the time, seems to be a problem.
Yeah, there's, as dreary as a wet, rainy climate may seem, it's really good radiation shielding. And it keeps, the particulate radiation from gases, kind of compressed to some extent.
Well, I guess I don't really have anything else. So thanks for hanging out and chatting.
Cool. It was fun. Yeah.
All right, that's your show for the week. Thank you for joining me again. As always, I hope you learned something. I certainly did. Thank you again to Jamey for joining me in the studio to talk about all the radiology and technology goodness in the world today. Come to the website at panfuture.org. Email me at sean@panfuture.org. That's SEAN. Or it's a catch-all email, so you could just type gobbledygook blah 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 at panfuture.org and I would still get your email. Come to the website for all the links to places you can find the show and other information and find all the show notes. And I will talk to you again in the future.